Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Yet another entry into my series here. This one again, keeping with the theme of keeping it weird, as they do here in Austin. And thank you as always for your suggestions. I'll probably do one or two more for this entry, and then I'll give it a rest for at least a couple of weeks, and then go back to your suggestions again. This one, again, is keeping it on the weird side, and it's only because it seems to be an amalgamation of several different monsters all at once. In fact, it's probably, interestingly enough, the version of Smog, but on the Native American side, and I'll explain that here in a few minutes. But it's a very interesting monster, one that apparently there hasn't been any real sightings of, only because the only evidence of this monster comes from tellings from the Native American side and visual representations that used to exist on a wall / mural of sorts. So no physical evidence, in other words, no actual evidence of the creature, short of, again, telltale signs, legends, that kind of stuff that's been passed on. But even then, this particular monster has lasted time itself. It has been around for hundreds of years. If it's still alive, it would be definitely one of the longest living cryptids out there. And even then, the only reason why we know about this is because, again, of passed down secondhand information. But even then, that information only started at a certain point. This monster could have been in existence since way before then. And so what I'm talking about here is the entity known as the Piasa Bird. And some people call it just the Piasa, others call it the Piasa Bird. And it is, again, a variation of, let's say, Smog, but on the Native American side. And I'll explain why here. As I just mentioned, the very first indication of this cryptid, of this monster, was a couple hundred years back. It was in 1673, and it was through a visual interpretation of the monster. Here's what happened. During 1673, this was the time period when there was a lot of exploration going on in the early United States. A lot of people were coming over. A lot of people were visiting, exploring unknown areas. But at that time, of course, the Native Americans had lived in the modern-day U.S. for hundreds, if not thousands, of years beforehand. So on the explorers' side, there was a new set of explorers coming from the Eastern world, and they were just charting maps. They were trying to find out what this new land was like. And when that happened, one of the explorers actually came across a very interesting thing. And now this thing had already been in Native American folklore for the longest time ever. In fact, it could still have been existing right during that time, during 1673. But the only visual representation of it was a very large mural that was found near the Mississippi River. It was found by a gentleman by the name of Perry Marquette, and he actually goes by Father Marquette. He was exploring that area, and the notion of the title of him being father probably, again, as on some kind of religious exploration, trying to either convert the Indians there or to try to find settlements, anything like that. The original explanation is not found. But his exploration along the Mississippi River, he happened to come across a very interesting thing, which was a gigantic painting that was on the side of a wall. Now, this painting was built by the Indians. It was made by the Indians there. It was literally like a monument of some sort, their version of a monument to this creature. He was, of course, instantly fascinated by it, and he began asking around what it was. But what's interesting to know is that there wasn't just one of these creatures on that wall, but there were two of them. And he wrote down his description, and this is what he said. And this is straight from the source. This is his writing. So we have this even hundreds of years later. This is his experience. He said, "While skirting some rocks, which by their height and length inspired awe," which, on a little side note, gives you an idea essentially how big this mural was, "we saw upon one of them two painted monsters which at first made us afraid, and upon which the boldest savages dare not long rest their eyes. They are as large as a calf. They have horns on their head like those of a deer. A horrible look red eyes, a beard like a tiger's, a face somewhat like a man's, a covered body with scales, and so long a tail that winds all around the body, passing above the head and going back between the legs, ending in a fish's tail. Green, red, and black are the colors composing the picture. Moreover, these two monsters are so well painted that we cannot believe any savage is their author, for good painters in France would find it difficult to reach that place conveniently to paint them. So you see what I mean when I was talking about earlier about it being an amalgamation of a whole bunch of things. I mean, you have something like horns like those of a deer, beard like a tiger's, face like a man, body covered in scales, tail that wraps around the body. It's not just one representation. It's a whole bunch of mixture of animals mixed into one. And he actually did a drawing in his journal which would have been the most accurate representation of this item because he was the first witness, but unfortunately that drawing that he made was lost. He kept it in some canoe, and when the canoe capsized, the drawings were lost. So unfortunately his interpretation, which might have been the truest interpretation of this mural, is gone. And if you're wondering, like, why not just anybody just do another drawing of the item or take photos of it, it's because it's gone, and I'll explain here in a few minutes. Cut to a couple of years later, and there was another father. This gentleman, by the name of Father Hennepin, he too was exploring that area in and around the location, and then he came across that painting too, or that mural, and he published a book called A New Discovery of the Vast Country in America, and he was talking about it. He noted it in his sightings. It's hard not to, because of the size, because of the detail, because of the frightful look of this creature, that he too noted it in his book. What was interesting, though, was he stated that the painting was actually cut into the side of the mountain or the bluff there. So in other words, whoever did this work, which by the way still remains mysterious, there has never been any Native American group or anybody from that association that has said outright, yes, we know who made this painting, this is who they were. No, it still just remains a mystery as to the original source. But whoever did it actually cut the outline of the painting first into the rock, and then they painted over it. So it goes to show the extreme level of detail that would have gone into this particular item. By the way, another distinction with Father Hennepin was that he noted that this mural, that the Piasa, had wings. There's been some debate, though, with regards to the Piasa Bird, whether the original mural had wings or not, because the first man that saw it, again, Father Marquette, he did not describe any wings. I mean, if he did, he didn't necessarily say it outright, but everyone else has mentioned wings. But alas, again, we don't have the original mural to look at. But ever since then, it's gone with the assumption that the Piasa Bird has wings, which is why it's called the Piasa Bird. But again, there's the controversy is that the very first person that came across it, Father Marquette, never mentioned any particular wings, so it's still kind of up to debate. But Father Hennepin said that there was wings, and so that's the reason why we talk about it today as having wings. Cut later on to instead of now being in the late 1600s, now it's the early 1800s, so about a good 100 plus years later. And the creature, whatever this creature was, gets its first name. And this came from a major by the name of Major Amos Stoddard. He too came across this particular mural, this painting. He was apparently in and around that area because the Louisiana Purchase had just happened, and he was supposed to be the person responsible for making sure that whatever that land that was being purchased, anything along those lines, it would be surveyed, it would be investigated, just to make sure that everything is fine. And so when he came across it, this is what he wrote. He said, they called this the painted monsters on the side of the high perpendicular rock, apparently inaccessible to man, located between the Missouri and Illinois rivers, and known to moderns by the name of Piasa, still remains to a good degree of preservation. He is noted as being the first person to give a name to this monster, and it's kept that name ever since then. So again, this was in 1812, so 200 years later plus, the name started, the Piasa Bird, and it had stuck ever since because of this guy here. By the way, that does give away to the location of this particular mural. It's actually in it's between the Missouri and Illinois River. No exact location really where it is, but again, at least when it comes to its representation, we do have a modern visual representation, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes. And then to a couple of years later, and there was another person, a person by the name of Captain Gideon Spencer. He too was traveling the Mississippi River. He got a glimpse of the Piasa. But what was interesting to note was that this time, instead of two birds, quote-unquote birds, or two monsters on that bluff, there was only one. And what had happened was, apparently, weather, falling rock, there was instability amongst that bluff, and so unfortunately one of those depictions of the monsters was lost. So he was the first one to come across it and give the update and say, unfortunately, that there's no more any two monsters. Instead, there's just one. But he did come up with a very interesting note, and this adds to speculation that this particular entity, this monster, was real because of how the Indians, the Native Americans, would react to the mural. He said that upon closer inspection, he had found that there were gunshot marks and there were arrow marks near and around, both on the mural itself and near and around the areas surrounding it. He said that apparently the Native Americans at that time were giving great respect to this mural, great fear also to this mural, respect on the side that anyone that would pass by, if so inclined, on the Native American side, they would offer it like a smoke, like the tobacco that they had from their pipes, and they would offer it an opportunity to just leave it there for it to smoke. They would also blow smoke in the direction of the image, kind of like as a offer of respect. And then on the fear side, any Native Americans that would pass would also, if they had arrows, shoot arrows directly at the creature, the remaining creature, and either hit it or hit near and around the area as a mark of saying, I'm not afraid of you. I am, but I'm not. I'm going to attack you if you attack me. And with the case of some Native Americans who had guns, they would shoot at the mural and try to hit it or try to hit near and around it, again as an indication of what their intention was if this Piasa Bird would ever come back. And that's what the first instance that it was noted that the mural had these distinctive marks. Unfortunately, though, it was around this time period that very last mural was destroyed. What had happened was there was a prison that was built near and around that area. It was actually at a place near Alton, which is probably the closest approximation of deciding like where this mural was, Alton, Illinois. And the prison, once it was built, the Civil War happened a little later on in the 1860s, and it became kind of like a location for the Confederate Army. And so because of that location, once the Civil War began, then it was attacked. And so what had happened was, with all the volleys, with all the shells, with all the explosions, all the bullet marks, little by little, that particular mural, was the last remaining one, was getting destroyed further and further. And then unfortunately, it was destroyed permanently when someone had purchased a property, and then trying to make sure that they could find some kind of importance, some kind of item, whatever it could be, gold, diamonds, whatever, that particular location was blasted away. The wall, especially, that the mural was painted on, was blasted away in and around the time period of the mid to late 1800s, and when that happened, it permanently destroyed the quarry. But not before, again, there were some drawings that were done beforehand, both by the fathers I had described beforehand, and then by some of the others that gave it as like a telltale sign, the generational telling of the images and what they were captured. But unfortunately, again, if you want proof of the actual mural, it's long gone. The first sighting, again, showing the two monsters, half of it was gone by just natural weather, by just natural environmental impacts, and then the second half was destroyed permanently by somebody trying to find something within it, or probably it was just blown away, probably to just destroy the actual mural itself. It might have even been the Native Americans themselves wanting to get rid of this item once and for all. But unfortunately it's gone, so you will not have anything else. The closest that we have today is, and you've seen a picture of it already, is this one. This is a modern rendition of the Piasa painting. It's about not as close as it can be, because again, the description shows wings as what you see there. But if it truly had wings, or if it not had wings, this is it. This is at least the most famous side of the Piasa bird and how it looks like, the most, I guess, well-known representation of the bird itself. So take it for what it's worth. It could be the real deal of what the mural looked like. It could be something else completely different. Unfortunately, that first father I was talking about, who first saw the mural, his own drawing is long gone, and his would have been the most accurate at the time. So all we have now is this one, but this has become the de facto rendition of the Piasa painting. And you'll see another picture here to give an idea of how big this creature was, at least based on the representation. There's that person standing right next to it, and it is gigantic. It is actually not small. And the reason why it's called a Piasa is because it's known as the bird that can essentially kill men. It has a specific connotation, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But let's talk about first, was it real? Like, was the Piasa bird real? Was this monster real? Unfortunately, again, there's no specific evidence suggesting that, yes, this is the bullet, the smoking gun, this is it right here. This showcases that the bird is 100% real. The only thing that we have right now that shows evidence of this bird is, again, drawings of a mural that no longer exists. But there is one person that told of an exploration that he made upon a cave, and I found this to be very, very fascinating. Here's what happened. There was a gentleman that was essentially traveling. He was on an expedition to try to find this bird. I mean, he was trying to make sure that, yes, I'll find it. I'll find this bird. This is the proof that we'll have right here. And this was by a gentleman by the name of Professor John Russell. In 1836, he went on this exploration. He wrote about it in his book. It's called Records of Ancient Races in the Mississippi Valley. And here's what he said. He said, "Near the close of March of the present year, I was induced to visit the bluffs below the mouth of the Illinois River above that of the Piasa. My curiosity was principally directed to the examination of a cave connected with the above tradition as one of those to which the bird has carried his human victims. Preceded by an intelligent guide who carried a spade, I set out on my incursion. The cave was extremely difficult of access, and at one point in our progress I stood at an elevation of 150 feet on the perpendicular face of the bluff, with barely room to sustain 1 foot. The unbroken wall towered above me, while below me was the river. After a long and perilous climb, we reached the cave, which was about 50 feet above the surface of the river. The roof of the cavern was vaulted, and the top was hardly less than 20 feet high. The shape of the cavern was irregular, but so far as I could judge, the bottom would average 20 by 30 feet. Now, here's the interesting part. The floor of the cavern throughout its whole extent was one mass of human bones. Skulls and other bones were mingled in the utmost confusion. To what that they extended, I wasn't able to decide, but we dug to a depth of 3 or 4 feet in every part of the cavern, and still we found only bones. The remains of thousands must have been deposited here. How and by whom and for what purpose, it is impossible to conjecture. Isn't that fascinating? That comes from the professor, John Russell. That's the guy. He was a professor at the time at a college named Shirtlift College, and again, he was doing this exploring. But I found that recollection of him, of his expedition, to be so fascinating because it is the closest proof that we have that this Piasa bird truly existed. It could still exist now, but if it did, or if it does right now, there's no evidence of it. But his first-hand account of this discovery of the cave, again, shows how hard it was to get to that cave, because again, it was not on the floor. The connotation of it being a cave, you would think that it's just easy accessible, just right there on the ground. No, they had to climb. They had to climb 50 feet above the surface of the river, and then even then, there was that alcove with just barely, a couple of feet to walk through. As he said, barely enough room to sustain 1 foot. And then finally, once you reach the cave, there was the inside of it that was vaulted, and the top of it, barely 20 feet high. So this was not a cave that no man could just easily access to. Something had access to it, and something that the thing that had access to it would only be able to do so if it could either A, fly, or B, move in some manner that no man could do the same as well. And so his was the only proof of something that lived in this cave that had thousands and thousands of bones. So that's the closest proof that we have of the Piasa bird being in existence, and that was his tale. Unfortunately, this professor never actually placed a exact description of where the cave was. Otherwise, people right now would be able to find it, would be taking pictures, would be showing footage of their own exploration of that cave. So unfortunately, John Russell, he did a good job at least giving a first-hand account, but he never gave a description of where this cave was, so that way we could, try to find out the proof, when it was. And then finally, here's where as far as the existence of the Piasa bird, to continue it, the proof that comes from the second-hand tales tied by the Native Americans. In fact, the word Piasa, as I mentioned a little earlier today, actually means quite literally the bird which devours men. And it all came from a story tied to a chief named, I believe his name was Owatoga, and how his tribe was one of the first ones to encounter this bird. Apparently this monster came out because at that time there was so much war happening between the Native Americans and either amongst themselves or some of the new travelers that it would leave corpses, and that apparently drew this bird out. And once the bird came out, it started eating the corpses, and once that happened, it liked the taste, and so it would hunt men, and it would hunt particularly the Native Americans, since they made up the abundance of the location there, and it would hunt them, it would carry them off, never to be seen again. So finally, after some time, this chief finally decided, he went on like a vision quest of sorts, and during this vision quest, it was given to him the answer as to how to defeat this particular monster. And again, this is where I mentioned earlier how this is like a real life version of the monster Smog comes into play. His quest involved having his men summoned, and that way they could all just go at once, hunt this particular entity, hunt this monster. But the chief Owatoga was going to use himself as bait first, and so what he was going to do was he was going to try to bring out this monster from its hiding, have it attack the chief, but the chief would hold on to the ground either by branches or by rocks, would hold on to the ground as much as possible, because they would allow his men to do this. At a particular point, when the wings of this bird were unfurled in a particular manner, it would leave in like some area, presumably within its chest, wide open for a vulnerable spot. And that's when the young men that were working with the chief would come out. They would have arrows that were poisoned, and they would all shoot at once at that vulnerable spot, and that would bring the bird down. And so when the chief did that and he laid on the ground, sure enough, it brought out the bird. The chief was attacked. He was able to hold on though to the ground. Apparently the Piasa Bird was not too happy about it and was struggling to try to lift the chief off of the ground. And in one particular moment, when the Piasa Bird unfurled its wings at its highest to try to again lift the chief off the ground, that gave the moment that the other men needed, and they jumped up from their hidden areas. They fired their arrows. They hit the bird or the monster right in the location that they needed to, and then the bird flew away. In fact, it was flying away, but it crashed into the nearby Mississippi River, never to be seen again. Which leads to another interesting thing. If that legend is true, then somewhere in the Mississippi River there are, if the thing is dead, the bones of the Piasa Bird. They're there. They're actually on the bottom of the river, ready to be picked up, ready to be placed in the museum, ready to be viewed in awe. So even to this day, apparently there are people that are trying to find those bones. Very fascinating stuff. So the Piasa Bird, what do you guys think? A real life smog, a version of, at least on the Native American side, a pretty weird monster slash cryptid. Again, a whole combination of things. It could have been a giant dragon, a snake, it could have been a tiger with wings, whatever it was. Unfortunately, we don't have any history, like physical evidence of it, because the only existence of it was that mural that depicted the two of those monsters, which adds the question, were there more than one? Because that mural definitely had it. But wherever this particular Piasa Bird is, it is gone. It is no longer, to this day, found anywhere. No tales of it. So if anyone knows any particular other stories tied to the Piasa Bird, please post your comments, share them below. It'd be fascinating to see if there's any modern tales of this particular entity. But even then, to this day, hundreds of years later, it remains a very powerful figure within the area there. So, alright everybody, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.